The village of Duerholm lay hidden beneath a constant shroud of mist, where the river crawled sluggishly past moss-eaten bridges and the church bell tolled even when no hand pulled its rope. The villagers spoke little of the cemetery that lay beyond the hill, an ancient plot of land surrounded by crumbling stone walls, where ivy consumed the crosses and the earth always seemed freshly disturbed. Few went there except for one man, the grave digger. His name was Elias Ward. He had been the caretaker of Duerholm's cemetery for as long as anyone could remember. Some said he'd been there 50 years, others claimed 100. He lived alone in a crooked cottage by the gate, with a single lantern that glowed through the fog like a watchful eye. His hands were calloused, his clothes perpetually dusted with earth, and his voice, when he rarely spoke, carried the tired hush of someone who had spent a lifetime listening to silence. Every morning before dawn, Elias would walk through the rows of graves, murmuring softly as though greeting old friends. He would brush leaves from headstones, straighten leaning crosses, and whisper the names etched in stone as if afraid they might fade from memory. When new graves were dug, he worked alone, refusing help even from the younger men of the village. He said the ground knew him, it yielded to him gently, and he to it. But what made Elias's cemetery strange was not his solitude. It was the flowers. Each grave he tended sprouted blooms no one had planted. Wild lilies, violets, and roses that glowed faintly in moonlight, as though dew had turned to light itself. No flower grew on the graves left untouched by his care. Even the weeds withered where his hands had not reached. At first, the villagers thought it was a blessing. The Lord has given him a gift, the priest had said once, watching the blossoms shimmer pale blue beneath the moon. But others whispered that it was a curse, that the flowers fed not on sunlight, but on sorrow. One winter, a young woman named Clara came to Duerholm after her husband was buried there. She was only 20, her face soft with grief and disbelief. Elias found her kneeling by the mound, her fingers tracing the cold stone as if willing it to warm beneath her touch. He stood at a distance until she noticed him, his figure rising from the fog like a statue. "You're the grave digger," she said quietly. He nodded. "Do they? Do they rest here, truly?" She asked, her eyes searching his face. Elias looked over the rows of graves, the flowers swaying in a wind that could not be felt. "They rest as much as the living allow them to," he murmured. "Grief keeps them near. Love holds them tighter than soil." After that day, Clara began visiting more often. She brought fresh water for the flowers and bread for Elias, though he rarely ate in front of her. Over time, she began to notice things others didn't. When Elias touched a headstone, the air shimmered faintly, and when he whispered the names, the petals of the flowers seemed to tilt toward his voice. "Do you talk to them?" she asked one twilight evening. "I remember them," he replied. That is all the dead ask, to be remembered. When memory fades, they grow restless. The earth feels their longing. Clara found his words both comforting and terrifying. She started dreaming of her husband walking through fields of pale roses that glowed like ghosts. In the dream, he smiled, but his lips never moved. Then came spring, and with it, a strange occurrence. One morning, Clara found the grave digger lying motionless near a fresh grave. His shovel had fallen beside him, and his lantern was still burning though the sun had risen. She rushed to his side, but his eyes were open, unseeing, fixed on the clouds. For a moment she thought him dead, but when she touched his hand, he stirred. "I dug. But there was no name," he whispered, voice cracking like brittle wood. Clara looked where he pointed. A new grave, its earth freshly turned, but no stone marked it. The priest swore no burial had been ordered. No villager was missing. Yet the grave remained, silent and ominous. That night, the villagers gathered near the cemetery gate, muttering prayers. They begged Elias to leave the place be, but he refused. "The ground called to me," he said simply. "It's not yet finished." The next morning, lilies bloomed over the nameless mound, dark red, the color of dried blood. From that day on, the grave digger changed. He spoke less, even to Clara. His hands trembled when he worked, and sometimes he would pause mid-task, staring at the earth as though listening to something beneath it. On stormy nights, the villagers claimed they saw lights flickering among the graves, blue and green like will-o'-wisps, and the faint echo of voices that were not quite human. Clara tried to confront him. "Elias, you're not well. You should rest." He only smiled faintly. "Rest? The ground never rests, child. It only waits." She didn't understand until one moonless night when she followed him into the cemetery. He moved like a shadow, lantern swinging low, the mist curling around his boots. He stopped before the nameless grave and knelt. She hid behind a tree, watching as he pressed his palm into the soil and whispered words she did not know. The earth seemed to breathe under his hand. A faint hum filled the air, and the lilies stirred, opening even though there was no light. Then, from within the soil, something shifted. A hand, pale, skeletal, emerged, reaching toward him. Clara gasped, and Elias turned sharply, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "Do not fear," he said, voice hollow and distant. "She only wishes to return what was taken." But when the hand fell back into the earth, Elias did not move away. He leaned closer, whispering something she couldn't hear. The ground swallowed the sound, and then, slowly, him. Clara screamed and ran forward, but when she reached the grave, there was nothing left but the lantern flickering beside an untouched mound. Elias Ward was gone. The villagers searched for days. They dug where the nameless grave had been, but found nothing, no body, no coffin, not even the lilies. Only bare soil, cold and black. Eventually, they sealed the cemetery gates and declared it forbidden. But the flowers kept growing. Years passed. Duerholm aged and dimmed. The church roof caved in, the bell rusted silent. Yet in the cemetery, the blooms never died. They spread beyond the walls, crawling through cracks and spilling onto the road, white, crimson, and violet. No one knew how they grew without seed or sun, and on certain nights, when the mist rolled thick and the moon was hidden, travelers passing the old graveyard would see a lantern glowing faintly among the stones. They said it was the grave digger, still tending his garden. Clara grew old, her hair silver as frost. She became the last to remember him. On the night she felt her time nearing, she walked up the hill once more, leaning on her cane. The gates creaked open at her touch, though no one had oiled them in years. She followed the path she had taken so many times in youth and found. At the center of the cemetery, a single grave she had never seen before, the new stone. Smooth. Untouched by weather, it bore her name. Clara fell to her knees, her heart thundering. "Elias," she whispered. "Is this your doing?" The wind stirred. The flowers around her began to sway in slow rhythm, as if breathing. She thought she heard a voice, his voice, soft and mournful. "They bloom only for those I love," it said. "And I have loved you too long to let you fade." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for the stone. Beneath her hand, it was warm. The scent of lilies filled the air. She closed her eyes, and the world softened, her breath slowing, her heartbeat quieting. By morning, the villagers found her there, peaceful and still, a faint smile on her lips. Around her grave, flowers had already begun to grow, white and red, intertwined. No one ever entered Duerholm cemetery again, yet the legend endured. They said the grave digger's garden had become eternal, that every soul buried within it bloomed into beauty, watched over by the man who could never die, bound forever to his sacred duty, and sometimes, when fog draped the valley like a shroud, people swore they could hear the faint scrape of a shovel, the hush of earth being turned, and a man's low voice murmuring names into the mist. The flowers would tremble, the soil would sigh, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though the dead still breathed beneath his care, for the garden of the grave digger was no ordinary garden, it was a covenant, between life and death, sorrow and love, memory and the eternal bloom of remembrance, and so, under the ghostly glow of moonlight, the flowers of Duerholm continued to blossom, each petal a whisper from the forgotten, each fragrance a promise kept by the man who tended them, because in that sacred earth, beneath the roots and stones, the grave digger still walked, silent, unseen, and unending, among his garden of souls.